Hey folks, welcome back to HMBA 614 Health Services Management. I'm your professor, Professor Roberts, and let's dive right into stuff. So this is the second week of the class. So our agenda basically is I'm going to talk about the reading from the first week. Now some of you may not have had your textbook already, but hopefully you do now. So chapters 1 and 2 are from the first week's reading, 3 and 4 are from this week's reading, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the paper, which is about queuing theory. And it's actually a pretty interesting theory. The math can get extremely complicated, but we'll talk about that. So, chapter 1, defining a project. What is a project? Hopefully, you guys understand that a project is something unique. It's a one-time deal. It's not an everyday thing. That's an operation. It's not a repeating process, whether it's quarterly or monthly or even yearly. It's a one-time deal, such as building a building or a remodel. Those things are unique. You have a unique outcome or deliverable at the end. So that projects are usually have an end result in mind. And now, not all projects will accomplish 100% of what's being sought. Sometimes we have to settle. It happens. But we can usually get 90 to 95% of what we're looking for if everything, such as our budget and our schedule, aren't adjusted. So, and of course, the scope of the project. Hopefully, they don't add more onto our project and expect us to do more with less, or don't give us an additional budget or schedule to accomplish that. The project life cycle, projects start off with the initiation phase, where this is where the project's being defined. What is it going to do? You're knocking out a lot of the stuff that I'm asking you guys to do as your project portfolio. You're coming up with a communication plan. You're building that work breakdown structure. You're doing the scheduling, or rough scheduling. You're coming up with a budget. You're doing all these things. And by doing all this, you're getting leadership or the executive offices to support your project. They're involved in this to the level that they desire. But we move on in the life cycle, and eventually we actually start the project. So we usually have like the initiation, the project is still in its infancy. A charter is developed, which is kind of a broad outline of what the project's going to do. This is your budget, this is your team, this is the project manager, this is your sponsor, or the executive that's, or maybe a program manager that's there to help you should you need it, like remove obstacles, barriers, and stuff like that. And then we move on into a planning phase where most of those documents are created, the communication, the work breakdown structure, and all that. And then we move into like a managing and controlling phase. Now, you can look at these as two separate phases. When you're actually executing the project, right? So the managing, you're a project manager, right? But your team is executing the project. So you need to be managing and controlling. So if things are going off the rails, you need to control and bring it back onto the rails. And those two are generally seen as done as the same time, because you do need the oversight, but you're managing the project. And we have a lot of tools that we use during that. So when we get to that section of our book, we'll talk about that. And then, of course, at the end, we have a closing phase. We're winding down the project. We're releasing people back to their home departments. We're making sure all the bills are paid. All the paperwork is done. There's a lot of paperwork in project management, as you guys might have already noticed from looking at the syllabus. But it's an effort so later another project manager can take a look at what you did, and that can help guide them in what their project is. They might be doing something similar, but they are not doing something exactly like you did. Remember, projects are unique. But if you're renovating, let's say the ENT's area, ear, nose, and throat, those providers' area, well, a renovation is a project, but a lot of the lessons you learn from a renovation can be applied to another project that you might be renovating pediatrics. So a lot of lessons learned. Maybe you work on a different strategy with working with the contractors, or you do this contractor before this other contractor. So you learn a lot in that closing because of you make the documents in your closing, which will help the next person down the road. So because of the nature of this course, we're going to be looking at project manager in a healthcare environment. You know, every industry has their own unique way of doing project management. If we were talking about IT project management, that is a whole different ballgame because we're usually talking about software and hardware, those type of things. But we're talking about patient outcomes, people's lives, giving people a new lease on life. So these kind of things we have to look at from that angle. And that actually gives us a lot of management differences. So strategically, projects are sometimes looked at strategic as a step to get to the next step. Like we're going to build a building because we need to expand pediatrics. I'm using Ruby Hospital as an example. It was identified that there's more children that need hospital services, or we want to reach out and see this as a opportunity to serve the community, or it could be just a straight profit motive. Don't know what it is. It doesn't really matter. The strategic goals of the organization have led to this project being done. But strategic is usually, looking at those high level ideas. How do you accomplish the mission of the organization? And projects, they don't jump that far. We work in steps. So usually projects are not strategic. They're stepping stones to get to that strategic goal. Operations, that is the day-to-day thing that you guys are doing. For example, an emergency room. Patients come in that feel like it's the worst day of their lives because they're at the emergency room or emergency department, and they get treated. Usually a nurse comes in, make sure the patient's at least stable, let's say. Gets everything, the history and all that on the patient. And then their probably billing is going to come in next. Of course, insurance wants, the hospital wants to get paid and they bill insurance most of the time. And then the doctor will come in at some later time, whether it's right away or it's an hour later. I mean, it comes down to the urgency of everybody else that's in the emergency department. But those are day-to-day operations. We don't do anything. That is not project management. Now, if we were going to revamp those operations, that could be considered a project, but the day-to-day stuff, that's not project. Of course, there's also crisis. This is when stuff has hit the fan. We need to make this accomplished now. Usually in a crisis situation, paperwork is not an issue because no one cares about the paperwork. The budget, people are conscious about the budget, but they want to solve the crisis. And crisis is because something went wrong. It was not intended to go wrong. So it's kind of like slapping a Band-Aid on something to get it fixed. And then a project can be done later that can address the root cause of the crisis. So the projects are unique deliverables. I'm hoping you guys are getting that because I'm repeating it so many times. At least I'm hearing myself say it so many times. So projects, we have our own structure. Most companies, depending on how mature the company is with their project management, generally don't have what's called a project management office. Now you go to some of the larger corporations, Microsoft, Google, they have a project management office. And that office oversees the multiple projects that they're doing at the same time. I would imagine that WVU Medicine has a project management office due to the sheer size of the organization. WVU, the university, has a project management office because there's construction projects going on, renovations, and so much more going on at the university. So the project management office is usually how projects are managed. It makes it easier because that project management office then reports to, let's say, the chief operating officer or chief information officer, and that's the connection to the executive leadership. So defining a project really comes down to knowing what you want the end result to be. A lot of people will start a project and they don't know what the end result is or what the desired outcome is. And that is difficult because how can you know if you accomplish what you set out to do if you don't know what that end goal is? I mean, have you ever started something like that? You didn't know what the end goal was and you started doing something? You just don't know when it ends. And it's like, oh, well, let's keep adding stuff to it. I know I've done that. I probably did that yesterday. So let's move on to chapter 2, planning a project. So first, a project has to be chosen. Why do we choose this one over this other one? That is probably one of the hardest things. We only have a limited budget, but how do we choose that we're going to renovate, let's say, this office or this department, or do this other department? How do we choose which one, right? You could flip a coin. You could look at how much it's going to cost and compare that to how much money there is in the budget. Or it could be that something other. Maybe the department head has pull with the project management office and it's kind of a buddy-buddy thing. Either way, a project has to be chosen. And hopefully it's a little bit more of a proper process than buddy-buddy or flipping a coin. Hopefully. But I've seen it done, the buddy-buddy and the flipping a coin. So some tools that we use to identify what we want to change is we'll do like a root cause analysis. There's several ways to do this. We could do the 5 whys method. So we ask the question why 5 times. So why is the roof leaking? Okay, well, there's a hole in it. Well, why is there a hole in the roof? Well, we haven't done maintenance in 10 years. Well, why haven't we done maintenance in 10 years? The guy retired who kept on top of that. Well, why didn't that get put into a system that reminded us to do that? And after a series of asking the question why, generally it's 5, but it can be less, it can be more. You find out the root cause. It could be that individual maybe kept things by paper, and when they left, all that paper was thrown out because it wasn't thought it was important. So that's what caused the roof to leak. Now we have maybe not a crisis, but we have an urgent need to repair the roof. Brainstorming. So sometimes we just put a bunch of people in a room and we start brainstorming. What do we need to do to make this thing better, or provide better or more opportunities for care to be given in pediatrics? Well, do we lease some office space in the community and set up like a pediatric family practice? Or do we build a children's wing onto our hospital? And then we can add all these different focused areas or specialty areas for pediatrics, such as a pediatric emergency room, which my son was recently at. Nice area, but didn't want to be there. Of course, it's an emergency room and my son was going. He's good. Don't worry about it. So brainstorming, you can think of all the possibilities, and then the project can be how to get there. But of course, brainstorming, you don't want to say an idea is bad off the bat. You want to develop the idea. So nothing is there's no silly ideas. Of course, we all know that's not true. But when you're first doing brainstorming, don't eliminate anything off the bat. Just throw it up there on Post-it notes and put it on a wall. And then later, once you have a number of ideas, then start filtering them through. And then of course we have consensus building. You can maybe have various departments come in and pitch their idea. And you can tell them these are the criteria, and they have to convince, or maybe a consensus with the executives, an executive office, to advocate for theirs to be the winner. But you can maybe just put all the department heads in a room and have them try to figure out which one is worthy of the time. Worthy of the time budget for the project. Of course, you might have to maybe send a crash team up there because they're probably going to fight each other on it. But, that's worst case scenario. Hopefully they're all professional enough to have a civil discussion. But the consensus would be everybody agrees, right? Consensus. So get everybody to agree on this is the course that we should follow. Organizational structure. Some organizations are better at projects. And it depends if you're either in like a hierarchy structure, a matrix, or there's several other kinds, or a hybrid. Because that goes into how do you get your project team. So there's organizations that are leaning towards project management, and their structure is designed to support that. Most of the time you see that in software development companies or IT companies. People expect to be put on teams, so the company structures that way. But then you have other groups, like let's say the academic setting. One of the things is we kind of sit in our offices and we don't want to work with other departments, let's say. Well, that's not really conductive or conducive to an organizational structure for projects, because probably only a couple people want to be on that team. They see the value in it, but then again, they're like, I got better things to do. I don't want to be here. That's not really conducive to our project because they're not going to put their full effort into it. And of course, because this is a healthcare orientated project, we have regulatory considerations. Now, you folks are probably more versed in the various regulatory sides of it, but there's so much to consider. Thinking about x-rays, for example, that there could be some material in those x-ray machines that is regulated, or the amounts of energy those x-rays that x-ray machine could output is regulated. Or there's only so much x-rays you can give a person in a year. I don't know. I'm just coming up with stuff. But, there's so much. A pharmacy probably has regulations about maybe no one can be in the pharmacy unless the pharmacist is there, or, things of that nature. So think about your various areas of expertise and what regulatory influences are on your specialty. It could be just like if you're in the emergency department, your job is to keep people alive until they can move on to a surgeon who can possibly take it from there. Basic thinking. I understand most jobs get much deeper than how I'm glossing over them. But I was an EMT. My job was to keep them alive, to hand them over to the emergency room. Now, I won't say I was 100% successful, but I had a pretty good track record. Now, of course, the person got into their own trouble, and I can only do what I could do. But there's so many regulations. Like, in order to be an EMT, I had to get state certified. If you're a medical provider, you probably had to get licensed, and so on and so forth. So all this stuff is things we have to consider. Maybe these regulations will impact our project, and we need to be aware of that. So chapter 3, it's about getting started with the project. So we're kind of kicking it off. We're making sure we have what we need when we need it. So usually we start with that sponsor, then the charter. So the sponsor is usually an executive or a senior level director who is behind it. They're the ones who are looking to be notified when there's problems and also success. But oftentimes they don't need daily updates. They may only need weekly emails. Hey, we're doing well. Or they might just want a monthly sit-down meeting with the project manager, just so they're aware of what's going on before a board meeting. It varies from sponsor to sponsor, but this person is also to help you get past roadblocks or speed bumps as you need it. So they should have that type of power within the organization to do it. I know many projects I've been on, it's been hard to get a bookkeeper or an accountant or somebody from finance onto my team. And, going to the department head, they wouldn't give me the person I needed. I didn't care who. I just needed someone who was qualified to do that level of work I needed. And they wouldn't give them to me. Went to the sponsor. I had a person the same day. So it helps to go to this person after you exhaust all methods to obtain, let's say, a resource, people or resources in project management, to get what you need. The charter, like I mentioned earlier, that's the project. They might give it a fancy name like Project Bluebird or, something. They might have fun with it, or they'll just say project to renovate the emergency department. Okay. Usually they'll establish who the people are, such as that sponsor, the project manager. They might define a couple people that will be on your project team, or stakeholders to this. So probably the director of the medical or the emergency department or manager, or whatever the title is probably going to be one of those people for that renovation. You might have some other people also interested in that. You might want the medical director for the emergency medical system, like the ambulances and stuff. You might want them to be on that team too. So all these people can get added, and it's a starting point for that project manager. This charter also gives the project manager the authority to do the work. So that's very important right there. The charter gives the project manager the authority to do the work, do the project. It outlines the budget, probably will outline things such as if you want to spend more than this amount of money, you have to get approval from the sponsor, or little details that might be company specific. Work breakdown structure. We need to know. So the project, let's just keep going with the renovation of the emergency department. You probably need somebody to come in and clean. You need somebody to come in and tear out walls. You need, another task might be to do the framing. You probably need some specialists to do, whoever does like the oxygen lines, the vacuum lines, that kind of stuff. Electrical, all this type of little tasks that are involved with a renovation need to be put on a work breakdown structure. And usually the work breakdown structure looks like a hierarchy chart. So at the top, the pinnacle of that, of like the little pyramid, would be the project name. The next level might be tear down is one, and the other one might be build out. And there might be another one like acceptance. And then underneath the tear down, you probably have a project or a task of ripping out the walls, and so on and so forth, the little details within it. And when you're doing the work breakdown structure, the bottom level, so the lowest level when you go down the tree, if you want to think of it like a family tree, that lowest level, you can put a schedule on that, and you can put an estimated dollar amount on that. So you can say, okay, well, to break out, tear out all the drywall, clear out the walls, maybe have to deal with asbestos. That's going to cost us this much money. It's going to take 3 weeks to do. You can actually do that at this point. And the same thing for all the other little tasks that have to happen. Now, when I say tasks, you don't want to go down all the way to like removing electrical outlets. That can be lumped together into a higher level. But when you do these levels, you don't want to go past, let's say, half a day's worth of work. There is a point where you get too detailed in this work, in the work breakdown structure. After that, we have something called creeping. This is schedule creep. So you have, let's say you've gone through the work breakdown structure, you've built the schedule, and the schedule says you're going to be done by April 28th, which is the end of the 16-week semester for this year. But tasks are taking longer than anticipated. So with that logic, your finish date of April 28th would actually get pushed. Now we might be into May. And if we still have this creep, we could see that go further. But this creep is generally because your scope is expanding, or people aren't following the scope. The scope is the boundaries of your project. So for using that example of renovating the emergency department, well, it's renovating the emergency department. That is the scope. Why are we worried about the hall outside the emergency department? Now, if we damage something, yes, we need to fix that. But that's beyond the scope of this project. We're not going to go and move on into other areas of the hospital with our project. We're only focused on the emergency department. So that creep of the scope will usually push our schedule, and it will eat up our budget. And we have another thing called gold plating. This is where we go beyond what we need to do. So if our project says that we're going to paint the walls, well, we should not be putting wallpaper up. That's gold plating. You're doing extra. It's not necessary because the project called for paint on the walls, not wallpaper. If that makes sense to you guys. So yeah, that's essentially chapter 3. There's a lot more details in all these chapters that I'm going over. I mean, I'm trying to keep this relatively short video. Looking at the time, I'm doing all right. So chapter 4 is about time. This is that schedule part of it. So the first thing it talks about is estimation. How long do we estimate the project is going to take? And this is a very difficult one to do. If you're a brand new project manager and you've not done a similar project in the past, you don't know how long it's going to take. This is where we can reach out to maybe experts. When I talk to facilities about the renovation of the emergency department and ask them, hey, you guys have been through a renovation. How long does it take to do this? And they'll tell you, it takes about 2 weeks to do that. And you can ask them these questions and they can be considered an expert. And you can put down an estimate. Or they might say, well, it takes 2 to 4 weeks. Well, 2 or 4 weeks, or 2 to 4 weeks. Well, 2 weeks, how likely is that to happen? 4 weeks, how likely is that to happen? So you probably could estimate somewhere closer to the 3. And we have an estimation method that we use for schedule and budget. So I'll go ahead and tell you guys this. We have we have an equation here. So our estimate is equal to the most pessimistic estimate. And so that would be like the 4 weeks in that example. Then we have the most optimistic estimate, which is 2 weeks. But then we have the most likely estimate. And that could be 3 weeks, just to make it simple. But in this equation, we're going to take 1 times the optimistic, 1 times the pessimistic, and then 4 times the most likely. So that's basically putting, 2/3 weight onto the most likely estimate, but we're accounting for the best outcome being the optimistic and the worst outcome being the pessimistic. So using that formula, it comes up basically to 6. So you have optimistic, pessimistic, and then 4 times the most likely. That is going to be a pretty good estimate, assuming your estimating numbers that you started with are accurate. Now, sometimes you just have to swag it, sophisticated wild-ass guess. You can adjust the schedule later. This is just an estimate, and everybody understands what an estimate is. At least, hopefully they do when you're talking to your organizations. So, next thing we can do is a network diagram. This is where we pretty much map out where things have to happen. So, for example, in order to renovate the emergency department, we have to relocate the emergency department, right? We can't just close the emergency department. Where's it going to go? Is it going to go in another part of the hospital? Is it going to be accessible to ambulances? How is there going to be a waiting room long enough? How are we going to let the community know where the emergency room is moved to? All this kind of stuff probably has to start first before you close the emergency room and start doing the work. So we can see the linkages between items, like what things have to come first before something else happens. So we can do all that. And then at the end, we'd have project conclusion. Excuse me. Schedule control. We need to keep an eye on our schedule. That first thing when I was talking about estimation, the facilities guys said it would take between 2 and 4 weeks. Let's say we did our estimate and we came up with 3 weeks as our estimate. using that little trick formula I gave you. Well, facilities might have been thinking of a smaller thing. So it's actually going to take 6 weeks. Well, we have to control our schedule. Is there something we can change in our schedule to stay with the same scheduled completion date? Or do we just have to push our scheduled completion date back? There's a lot of things we can do, and one of those is this thing called crashing. This is where basically we throw a whole bunch of resources at the problem. The appropriate resources, and of course this is going to cost a lot of money. So for example, the tear out has taken longer because we ran into asbestos or we punctured a water line or whatever the cases may be. Well, in order to get back on schedule, maybe we need to have 3 shifts of the reconstruction of the emergency department, or at least 2. That way we can try to catch up, and we can do that, let's say, for a week, and maybe that gets us back on schedule. Because my example was we were essentially 3 weeks behind. If we estimated 3 would be the tear out. Well, it took 6, so now we got to try to make up these 3 weeks. It depends on how important this project is to how much you choose to crash or not. An emergency room closing, that's probably pretty important because you're probably going to do a ribbon cutting ceremony when it opens. You might have the governor coming down, and trying to get the governor to come somewhere might be difficult, or some other dignitaries. So the end date might be critically important that you maintain because of various, let's say, external factors. So crashing might be the appropriate method here. And it's sometimes it's crashing it with people. Like I said, having 2 shifts instead of just 1 for the rebuilding of the emergency department. Or maybe it's, you need to throw more money at it. There's various different aspects to look at with this. So this is time. Scheduling, this is its own specialty within project management. So this is where you bring in people to help you come up with an estimate of how long things take. Unless you are very well versed in this. I never was, so I talked to people when I needed this kind of stuff done. And it has helped me greatly because I learned that I would have missed things. But they said, that educated me on, I need to think of this because that's part of it, but I didn't know about that. So bringing in that expert, or even looking at past projects and pulling out their paperwork. Remember those lessons learned from that chapter 1 talk I was talking about? All that closing paperwork. You as a new project manager could take a look at that paperwork and see, they did the pediatrics department, so that was about the same size area, and it took them 6 weeks to do that. Well, now you have almost an apples to apples comparison. Hopefully that is something you can think about when you're doing a project. So that's chapter 4. So chapters 1 through 4 in a nutshell. Project management is a very interesting area, but we also have a paper due this Sunday. So what is queuing theory and how can it be applied to a healthcare setting? So since I've been picking on the emergency room department or emergency department, or you can think of, let's say, Walmart, people get in lines. They form a queue. So why do people choose those lines? If you look at the lines, you might see, let's say, the express lanes, let's say 10 items or less, but there's 5 people in line, but there's 1 person in the regular lines and they have a half full shopping cart. You have 9 items. Which one are you going to get in? Everybody might say something different and have different reasons for doing it. However, there's been some mathematical work done in this area. I'm not expecting you guys to do any math for your papers, but how the theory itself, how can it be applied to that healthcare setting? Let's see. So yeah, it's a branch of mathematics. So how lines form, how they function, and why they malfunction. So I'm sure you've been to a store and maybe there was someone new as a cashier and they kept running into problem after problem after problem. Technically, that's a malfunction in this queuing theory, but if they were working fine, that line would keep on moving, and you can probably estimate how long it would take one person to get through that line. So this is a pretty interesting theory because it can be applied in so many different ways. The emergency room, people come to the emergency room. They have a choice between Ruby and Mon General, or urgent care. Hopefully they went to urgent care if it's open and it's an urgent care level type of situation. But, some people go straight to the emergency room because they think they're going to get in faster and get a higher level of care for a stubbed toe or ingrown toenail or, needing a stitch. People have their ways of thinking. Well, how is it? I mean, how do we apply that? So, for example, I needed to make an appointment for my son to be seen by a doctor. He was ill. They kicked him out of daycare and needed to get a medical clearance before he could return to daycare. If you're a parent, this is one of those things that you absolutely hate because you have to take your son to the doctor, or your child to the doctor, to get a simple signature because you just know it's a runny nose or whatnot. But, I reached out to University Town Center, I reached out to Cheat Lake, and I reached out to the Physician's Office Center. They all have pediatric offices, at least at the time that I had to do this. It was Cheat Lake that had an opening the same day. If I didn't get a regular doctor's office, I was considering going to an urgent care because it didn't matter that it was my son's physician. It was more about a doctor saying it's not COVID, which was the big deal back at that time. So, I called everywhere. I didn't want to wait several days. I wanted to be seen today or have my son seen today. So I kind of went through this a little bit, trying to find the lay of the land, and, looking at the lines and then choosing one. So hopefully this kind of points you guys in the right direction. But then again, this is an open-ended thing for you guys to, decide for yourselves. I asked how can it be applied. So what is queuing theory? I mean, that's essentially one answer. But how can it be applied? You guys can go almost in any direction you want as long as it's about queuing theory. So make sure you meet those requirements of, try to use APA style. I'm not, like I said, I'm not an English professor, but if you're just that poor on the writing, I might grade you on the writing, but I'm looking for the content. That's really what I'm looking for. Do you guys understand it? Now, this is a graduate level. I don't care about the sentence structure and all that kind of stuff. I want to know that you guys understand what you're talking about. So, yeah, that is what I was going to cover. Hopefully, this gets you guys in the right direction. I see that I'm running at about 38 minutes, and hopefully it just flew by for you guys. It did for me at almost 1 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, this is the best time for me to record, by the way. No noises. But anyway, so we're looking at, wow, why am I so off-centered? Okay, so we're looking at a great week, and I look forward to reading your papers on queuing theory. I'm going to try to catch up on grading as soon as possible. I know I'm behind. I'm behind in all my classes because of the craziness of the semester starting. So looking forward to the future of this course. And as always, let me know what you guys think as we progress, okay? That way I can make the course better for the next students and maybe even change some things in the future of this course. That way, like a constant improvement going on, continuous improvement. All right? So you guys have a great evening, day, week, weekend, whenever you're watching this video. And I look forward to next week. All right.